Okay, for some reason that live stream that I just tried was not working. I don't know why. So in any case, I'm going to record this here and post it like I have been doing lately. So, welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav, and we'll be learning today, Mirz Hashem, Daf Kuf Yud Amud Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchas Sukkah, very appropriate since I am recording this share on the first night of Chol HaMoed of Sukkos. We pick up today on the bottom line in the Shulchan Aruch Kuf Tes Amud Beis with a brand new Siman Taf Reish Mem Gimel Seder HaKiddush, the order of making Kiddush on Sukkos Ubay Gimel Seifim, and here we have 3 Seifim. Says the Mechaber Sif Aleph, Seder HaKiddush, the order in which we make the berachos of Kiddush are as follows. Yayin, the first bracha that we make when we make Kiddush in the Sukkos night, is the bracha of Bari Priyagofen, the bracha on Yayin. Now there are 2 very solid reasons why the bracha on the Yayin has to come first. First of all, we're Mekadesh ala Yayin. So we're making Kiddush Gufa over the kais of Yayin. We're holding the Yayin in our hands, so we make the Hagafen on the Yayin first. Second of all, if we have a bunch of different brachas that we have to make, we know the golden rule of Tadir v'she'enai Tadir, Tadir kaidim. When you have a choice of giving precedence to different things in halacha, we give precedence to that which is more frequent. We make a Bari Priyagofen more frequently than we make Kiddush. We make a Bari Priyagofen more frequently than we make a Leishev Basukah. And we make a Bari Priyagofen more frequently than we make a Shehechiyanu. So certainly, according to the rule of Tadir v'she'enai Tadir, Tadir kaidim, Yayin has to come first. So the Mechaber says, Seder HaKiddush, the order of the brachos of Kiddush are Yayin. First, we make the bracha of Bari Priyagofen on the kais of Yayin. Next, we say Kiddush. What's Kiddush? That's the bracha of Asher Bachar Banu Mikalam V'Raimamanu Mikal Hashayin V'Kiddishanu B'Mitzvaysav, and we end off Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh Yisrael V'Azmanim. So that's the bracha of Kiddush. That's Kiddush Hayoim. That's the bracha where we sanctify the day of Yom Tov. So first is Bari Priyagofen. Second is Kiddush. Next, the Mechaber says, is V'Sukkah. Next, we make the bracha Asher Kiddishanu B'Mitzvaysav V'Tzivanu Leishev Basukah. Now, typically, like we've mentioned before, in a typical case, the bracha of Leishev Basukah is going to refer to 2 different things. It's going to refer to the building of the sukkah. It's also going to refer to the mitzvah of, well, I shouldn't say that. I take that back. The bracha of Leishev Basukah really goes on residing in the sukkah, eating in the sukkah, sleeping in the sukkah. I'll reserve what I was going to say for the bracha of Shehechiyanu. So I take that back. The bracha of Leishev Basukah primarily is on the eating, sleeping, living, residing in the sukkah. That's bracha number 3. So first Bari Priyagofen, then Kiddush, then Leishev Basukah, V'achar kach Zman, and then finally we come to the last bracha of Kiddush, and that's the bracha of Shehechiyanu, the bracha that we call berachos Hazman, a bracha that we thank the Rabbeinu Shalom for allowing us to reach this significant time. And now the Mechaber explains why it is that the bracha of Shehechiyanu comes last. Says the Mechaber, Lefi Shehazman, because the bracha of Shehechiyanu, Chayzer, it refers back to Al Kiddush Hayoim. It goes on Kiddush. We're making a bracha of Shehechiyanu, thanking the Rabbeinu Shalom that he allowed us to reach the time of Yom Tov. Shehechiyanu v'kiyamanu v'yanu lazman hazeh. The Rabbeinu Shalom kept us alive. He kept us going. He supported us. He sustained us. Lazman hazeh, to this significant time of the Yom Tov of Sukkos. So it goes back on Kiddush, right? So therefore, the bracha of Zman has to come after the bracha of Kiddush, because the Zman is going back on Kiddush Hayom, Ve'er al mitzvah Sukkah, and it also goes back on the mitzvah of Sukkah. We make a bracha of Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvaysav v'tzivanu leishev basukah. We thank the Rabbeinu Shalom for giving us this mitzvah of Yeshivas HaSukkah, Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvaysav. The Rabbeinu Shalom is Mekadesh us He sanctifies us. He makes us more kadosh by giving us a mitzvah and giving us the opportunity to be mekayim the mitzvah. When we sit in the sukkah and we eat in the sukkah, you sleep in the sukkah, you mekayim the mitzvah of sukkah, we're mekadesh ourselves with that mitzvah. So we thank the Rebbeinu Shalom for giving us that mitzvah. Now, the bracha of Shehecheyanu also goes on that. We're thanking the Rebbeinu Shalom for allowing us to reach this significant time when we could be mekayim the mitzvah of sukkah. So since the Shehecheyanu is going back both on Kiddush Hayom and on the mitzvah of Yeshiva Sukkah, it's appropriate that the bracha of Shehecheyanu should come last, after we make the bracha of Kiddush and after we make the bracha of Leishev Basukah. So says the Mechaber. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Eis Katan Aleph, Yayin, Kiddush, V'Sukkah, the proper order of the brachas are Ber Priagafen first, Kiddush second, Leishev Basukah third. So the Mishnah Berurah says, if you're wondering, why is it that the Leishev Basukah comes after Kiddush? Maybe what we should do is, we should make Bar Priagafen, like we said, Tadir V'She'ena Tadir Kaidem, and also, we're not making Kiddush unless we have Yayin. So the Yayin comes first, that we understand. We said that Kiddush comes next. Why does Kiddush come next? Maybe Leishev Basukah should come next. And I'll give you a very good argument why Leishev Basukah should come next. Because we've already come into the Sukkah. We're sitting in the Sukkah. We're making the bracha sitting in the Sukkah. So why don't we first make the Leishev Basukah and then go on to Kiddush? So explains the Mishnah Berurah, we can't do it that way. You know why? She'i efshar levarech al hasukah, we cannot make the bracha of Leishev Basukah koidem she'yivarech al Kiddush Hayom, before we make the bracha of Kiddush Hayom. Shaharei mitchila niskadesh Hayom. Why is it that we're being mekayim the mitzvah of Yeshiva Sukkah? We're only being mekayim the mitzvah of Yeshiva Sukkah because niskadesh Hayom, because it's Sukkos. If it wasn't Sukkos yet, we couldn't be mekayim the mitzvah of Yeshiva Sukkah. So the mitzvah of Yeshiva Sukkah is secondary to the arrival of Sukkos. So if you're going to order the brachas, first we make the bracha of Kiddush Hayom, and we announce that it's Takas Sukkos, and we thank the Rebbeinu Shalom for giving us the Yom Tov, and we say Mekadesh Yisrael v'Azmanim, we're Mekadesh the Yom of Sukkah. Now that it's Sukkos, we can be Mekayim the mitzvah of Yeshiva Sukkah. So now we make the bracha Sheki Dishanim Mitzvaysav Tzivanu Leishev Basukah. And I think that's what the Chavetz Chaim means here when he says She'i efshar levarech ala sukkah. It's not possible, meaning it's completely inappropriate. She'i efshar levarech ala sukkah. You can't make the bracha on the mitzvah of Yeshiva Sukkah without first acknowledging the fact that it's Sukkos. Kaidim she'yivarech al Kiddush Hayom. Sharvei mitchila niskadesh Hayom. Because first you have to be mekadesh the Yom of Sukkos. First the Yom is mekudesh. First Sukkos arrives, and it actually is Sukkos. Only then do you have a chiyuv of Yeshiva Sukkah. So how are you going to make a bracha before acknowledging the day and being mekadesh the day as Sukkos? That wouldn't make any sense. Now, it's going to be very important to remember this Eis Katan Aleph over here for later in the shir on Kuf Yud Amid Aleph. So the Chavetz Chaim is explaining to me over here, why is it Yayin first and then Kiddush and then Leishev? Because first we have to be Mekadesh the Yom. First we have to thank the Rebbeinu Shalom and be Mekadesh the Yom of Sukkos. Then we're Chayiv in Yeshiva Sukkah, and then we make the Leishev. Okay. Ois Katan Beis, Va'achakach Zman. And next, we're going to make the bracha of Shehecheyanu. Now, before we read Ois Katan Beis, we have to jump back for a minute, and we have to go to Siman Taf Reish Mem Aleph. We have to turn one page back to Daf Kuf Tes Amid Aleph, and we have to see a very quick Biur Halacha. We said over here in Siman Taf Reish Mem Aleph, in Sif Aleph, we said that really it would be appropriate to make a bracha of Shehecheyanu when we build the sukkah. You arrive to a couple of weeks before Sukkos, and you go outside to your deck to build your sukkah, really it's appropriate to make a bracha of Shechayanu. Thank the Rabbeinu Shalom. Shechayanu v'kiyamanu v'higiyanu lazman hazeh, where it's now time to go build the sukkah. What a gevaldik simcha. That would be a very appropriate bracha. But the Makaber said we're not noying that way. Instead, what we do is we wait to make the Shechayanu until we make Kiddush on Yom Tov night. And we said possibly the reason why we wait is because of a machlokes rishonim. We said it could be you have different machlokes rishonim whether what was the machlokes again? I actually have to remind myself. Yeah, the question was if you would make the Shechayanu at the time that you build the sukkah, that Shechayanu, according to some Rishonim, would also cover the Shechayanu on the Yom Tov. So if you would make a Shechayanu at the time that you build the sukkah, you would have a shaila if you can make another Shechayanu now when you make Kiddush on Yom Tov. So we want to stay out of that shaila, out of that machlokes Rishonim. So we don't make a Shechayanu when we build the sukkah. Instead, we incorporate the Shechayanu that would be appropriate to make on the building of the sukkah. We incorporate it into the Shechayanu of Kiddush. And when we make the Shechayanu of Kiddush, we have in mind that it's the Shechayanu on Yom Tov. We have in mind that it's the Shechayanu on the building of the Sukkah. And we also have in mind that it's the Shechayanu on the Kiyam HaMitzvah of Yeshivas HaSukkah. That's what we said in Siman Tov Reish Mem Aleph. So again, the critical point is, really we should make a Shechayanu when we build the Sukkah. Now take a look here on Kuf Tes Amid Aleph in Bir Halacha Dibur HaMaschil Kishe Oisa Oisa. You should make a bracha of Shechayanu when you make the sukkah. Says the Chavetz Chaim, V'dafka Kishe Osa Oisa Toich Shloishim Lachag. However, it's only appropriate to make a Shechayanu on the building of the sukkah if you're building the sukkah within 30 days of Sukkos. Aval Kaidem Shloishim. But let's say you build your sukkah in the middle of the summer. You build your sukkah in middle of Av. You go ahead and you build your sukkah. It's more than 30 days away from Sukkos, and you're building the sukkah. Then says the Chavetz Chaim, Af al pi shekshera, even though the sukkah is going to be a kosher sukkah, we said you're allowed to make a sukkah all year. You can make it whenever you want. Af al pi shekshera, even though it'll be a kosher sukkah, b'sha'asa oisa l'shem chag, if you made it l'shem hachag, really, it's kosher even if you just make it l'shem tzeil. You don't even have to make it l'shem chag. If you made it a shelter, l'shem tzeil, it's a kosher sukkah. You might have to be mechadish badavar, you might have to add on a tefach of schach, but it is a kosher sukkah. Kamavur, Siman Tov Reish Lamed Vav Sif Aleph, Mikam Makayim, nevertheless, you still can't make a Shechayanu. Why? Because like mikri shas asiyah levarach alei azman. What is the bracha of Shechayanu? The bracha of Shechayanu is, thank you, Rabbeinu Shalom, Shechayanu v'kiyamanu v'giyanu lazman hazeh. That you kept me going, you kept me alive, and you supported me, and you sustained me, lazman hazeh, for this auspicious time. What auspicious time? The auspicious time when it's time to build a sukkah. Guess what? In middle of Av, it's not an auspicious time that it's time to build a sukkah. That's not the Zman of Asiyah Sukkah. The Zman of Asiyah Sukkah is within 30 days of Yom Tov. We know, we've learned many times, Shailim the Dirshu Milchas HaChag, Shloishim Yom Kaidem LaChag. So within 30 days of the Chag, that's the Zman of the Chag. And we have this in the context of many different halachas, right? The Chiyuv of Bedika, the Chiyuv of Bedika's Chametz is Chal on you 30 days before Pesach. It's not Chal on you before that. So 30 days before Sukkot is the Zman of Asiyas HaSukkah. That's when it's appropriate to make a Shechayanu. But if you're building the Sukkah 60 days before Sukkot, it's not appropriate to make a Shechayanu. Okay, that's what the Chavetz Chaim says over here in Kuf Tes Amid Aleph, Siman Tov Reish Mem Aleph in the Bir Halacha. Now let's go back to what we're learning. Kuf Tes Amid Beis, Siman Tov Reish Mem Gimel, Mishnah Berurah, Ois Cotton Beis. So the Makaber just told me that the proper order for the brachos is Yayin, Kiddush, Leishev Basukah, and then Zman. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Ois Cotton Beis, Ve'ein nafkamina. There's no nafkamina lahalacha Bein sha'asuka hoisa asuya v'haimedes im askach mikvar, whether we're dealing with a sukkah that was already built more than 30 days before Yom Tiv, ubein sha'asa kaidem chag hasukkos, or if you built the sukkah right now before Sukkos. What is the Mishnah Berurah telling me here? What the Mishnah Berurah is telling me is like this. The Mishnah Berurah is saying, if you made the sukkah more than 30 days before Sukkos, then the Biur Halacha that I just told you from Siman Taf Reish Mem Aleph says that there is no shechiyanu on the building of the sukkah, because you built the sukkah not during the zman of Asiyas HaSukkah. Oh, so now the Chavetz Chaim is telling you like this. What did the Mechaber tell us? The Mechaber said, what's the proper order of the berachos? Yayin first, that we understand. Kiddush second, that we understand. Like the Mishnah Berurah told us. First, Niskadesh Hayom, then comes the Chiyuv of Sukkah. What's third? Leishev Basukah, and Shechiyanu brings up the rear. Why does Shechiyanu come last? Because the Shechiyanu has to go back on Kiddush and on the Sukkah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, you might have had a Havamina that if my Sukkah was built during Av, then the Biur Halacha told me in Taf Reish Mem Aleph that there is no Shechiyanu on the building of the Sukkah. Ooh, so maybe if I built my Sukkah during Av, maybe now there is no Shechiyanu on the Sukkah. In that case, the order of the berachos should be Yayin, Kiddush, Shechiyanu, because the Shechiyanu is only going back on the Kiddush. It's not going on the Sukkah, because this Sukkah does not require a Shechiyanu. This Sukkah was built more than 30 days prior to Yom Tov, so this Sukkah doesn't get a Shechiyanu. And then last, Leishev Basukah. Why should we put the Leishev Basukah between the Shechiyanu and Kiddush? In the Mechaber scenario, if you built the Sukkah within 30 days of Yom Tov, so then I understand. The Shechiyanu is going back on Kiddush and on the building of the Sukkah, so it's going back on the Sukkah. So make Kiddush, Leishev Basukah, and then Shechiyanu. But if I built the Sukkah more than 30 days before Yom Tov, so then maybe the Shechiyanu is not going back on the Sukkah. So then I should do Yayin, Kiddush, Shechiyanu, so the Shechiyanu could go back on the Kiddush, and then Leishev Basukah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no, that's not true. There's no nafkamina here, whether it's a sukkah that was built more than 30 days before Yom Tov or not. Let's see it again inside. Ve'ein nafkamina. There's no nafkamina. Bein sha'asukkah isa isuya v'haimedes im askach mikvar. Whether this is an old sukkah that was built more than 30 days prior to Yom Tov, ubein sha'asa kaidem chag hasukkos, or whether you built the sukkah right before Sukkos. Either way, you got to make a leishev before you make the Shechiyanu. Why? Because the bottom line is, in either case, you didn't make the Shechiyanu when you built the sukkah. Either you didn't make a Shechiyanu when you built the sukkah because it was too early, or even if you built the sukkah within 30 days of Yom Tov, you still didn't make the Shechiyanu at the time that you built the sukkah, because we're not knowing to do that. We incorporate that Shechiyanu into the Kiddush. In Cain, if so, mutal alav akshav levarich zman al kiyam hamitzvah. Since the bottom line is you never made a Shechiyanu, even if it's a sukkah that's more than 30 days old, you never made a Shechiyanu, so forget the Shechiyanu on the building of the sukkah. You have to make a Shechiyanu on the kiyam hamitzvah of Yeshivas HaSukkah. So whether or not this sukkah requires a Shechiyanu on its building is irrelevant, because you still need to make a Shechiyanu on the Kiyam HaMitzvah of Yeshivas HaSukkah. And therefore the bracha of Asher Kedishanu b'mitzvayis v'sivanu leishev basukah still has to come before the Shechiyanu. Now, if you're medayik in the words of the Chavetz Chaim, the implication of the Chavetz Chaim is that if you would have made a bracha b'shas asiyas hasukah, let's say you built your sukkah a week before Sukkos, so it definitely was you're definitely allowed to make the Shechiyanu when you built the sukkah, and you did. You didn't listen to the minig. The minig is to incorporate the Shechianu with the Kiddush. You went ahead, you had a hergish, mamish, I gotta make a bracha. You made a Shechianu when you built the sukkah a week before Sukkos. Now what? The implication of the Mishnah Berurah is, Kevan shaloi birach aleh oz b'shas asiyah, since you did not make a bracha at the time that you built the sukkah, im kain, if so, therefore, mutal alav levar tzman al kiyam mitzvah. So now you have to make a Shechianu on the Kiyam HaMitzvah. But let's say I did make the Shechianu at the time that I built the sukkah. What happens then? I still have to make a Shechianu in Kiddush, because I have to make a Shechianu on Yom Tov. I have to make a Shechianu on the Chag. But now, where do I put the Shechianu? Now maybe I should put the Shechianu taka before the Leishev Basukkah. And that is what the Bir Halacha says. If you take a look on Kuf Yud Amid Aleph, it's in the middle of Bir Halacha Dibra Maschil Va'achakach Zman, which is a long Bir Halacha that begins on Kuf Tes Amid Beis. But if you go on to Kuf Yud Amid Aleph, by me it's the end of the second line down in the Bir Halacha. I think the Dirshu print is a little bit different. I want you to see it. So let me take a look where it is in the Dirshu print. Kuf Yud Amid Aleph. No, it's also second line down near the end of the line. Kuf Yud Amid Aleph in the Bir Halacha. Umashe Kosavnu, and this that I wrote in the Mishnah Berurah. Kevan shaloi birach aleh b'shas asiyah. Since you didn't make a bracha of Shechianu when you built the sukkah, therefore you have to make a Shechianu now in Kiddush on the Kiyum HaMitzvah of Yeshivas HaSukkah, and that's why the Shechianu still has to come last. Even though you don't need a Shechianu on the building of the sukkah, either because you already made one, right, or because you built it more than 30 days before, still the Shechianu has to come last, because it still goes back on the Leishev, because it goes back on the Kiyam HaMitzvah of Yeshivas HaSukkah. But that's only, said the Chavetz Chaim, Kevan shaloi birech aleh b'shas asiyah, since you didn't make a bracha at the time that you built the sukkah. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Di'im haya mevarech b'shas asiyah. If you built your sukkah a week before Sukkos, so you were allowed to make a Shechianu at the time that you built the sukkah, and you did, oz berachos hazman koi raka regel. Now the Shechianu that you make in Kiddush is only going on the Chag. It's not going on the building of the sukkah, because you made a Shechianu when you built the sukkah. So the Shechianu can't be going on the building of the sukkah. It's also not going on the Kiyam HaMitzvah of Yeshivas HaSukkah. Why not? I wasn't Mekayim the Mitzvah yet. I'm being Mekayim the Mitzvah now. Apparently, if you make a Shechianu at the time that you build the sukkah, inherent in that Shechianu, why am I building a sukkah? I'm building a sukkah to be Mekayim the Mitzvah of sitting in it. So that Shechianu on the Binyan HaSukkah automatically incorporates into it a Shechianu on the mitzvah of Yeshivas HaSukkah. It's like one umbrella Shechianu that covers the building of the sukkah and being Mekayim the mitzvah of sukkah. So if you made a Shechianu at the time that you built the sukkah, now the only reason you're making a Shechianu in Kiddush is because of the Chag. And therefore, says the Chavetz Chaim here in the Bir Halacha, Uladas HaTaisis for a rush, Ein Sarach, I skipped a line. Dema Yavarach B'shas Asiyah, Oz Birkas Hazman Koi Raka Regel, Val Kain Sarach Levarach Zman V'achakach Sukkah. And then you would make the Shechianu first, and then the Leishiv. So it would be Yayin, Kiddush, Shechianu, because the Shechianu is only going on Kiddush Hayoim, and then Leishiv Basukkah. Now, this is a big controversy, and we'll see it a little bit later. This is the root of the argument why some people switch the Leishev and the Shechianu on the second night of Yom Tov. Because the reasoning is like this. On the first night of Yom Tov, I made the Leishev first, and then the Shechianu, because the Shechianu was going back on the Leishev. The Shechianu was covering the building of the Sukkah and the mitzvah of Yeshivas HaSukkah. But now on the second night of Yom Tov, why am I making a Shechianu? I'm not making a Shechianu on the building of the Sukkah. I did that last night. I'm not making a Shechianu on the Kiyam HaMitzvah, I did that last night too. So why am I making a Shechianu now? The only reason I'm making a Shechianu is because it's fake of the Yoma, and maybe I have to make a Shechianu on the Chag tonight. Now you can't tell me, but Rabbi Weiss, Sveika de Yoma, maybe the bracha Shechianu that you made last night on the mitzvah of Yeshivas HaSukkah wasn't Chal, because maybe last night wasn't really Yom Tov. Maybe it's only really Yom Tov tonight. So tonight, on the second night, when you make a Shechianu, that Shechianu is not only on the Chag because of Sveika de Yoma, it's also on the Sukkah because of Sveika de Yoma. That's not true, and I'll tell you why. Because once I made a Shechianu last night, even if it's not really Yom Tov, so it's no worse than if I made the Shechianu 28 days before Yom Tov, when I built my Sukkah, and we said I cover with that the Shechianu on the building of the Sukkah and the Shechianu on the Kiyam HaMitzvah. So even if tonight is really Yom Tov and last night wasn't, but I still made a Shechianu last night. And that Shechianu covered the building of the Sukkah and the mitzvah of Yeshivas HaSukkah. So the Shechianu that I'm making tonight on the second night is only Sveik in the Yoma that maybe tonight is Yom Tov and last night wasn't. Well, in that case, the bracha of Shechianu should come right after Kiddush. It shouldn't come after the Leishiv. So that's why some people on the second night, they do Hagafen, Kiddush, Shechianu, and then Leishiv. Not Leishiv and then Shechianu. But we'll discuss that in greater detail a little bit later on. Excuse me. Boy, wow, we're already 26 minutes into the share. We didn't even get on to Kuf Yud Amud Aleph yet, even though we just read the Spear Halacha this on Kuf Yud Amud Aleph, but we're still in the Mishnah Berurah and Kuf Tes Amud Beis. Let's finish off Mishnah Berurah's cotton base. Im loy birich zman balayla. If you did not make the Shechianu Yom Tov by night, yuchal levarich kol shiva. You can make the bracha of Shechianu all 7 days of Yom Tov. In other words, if you didn't make the Shechianu on the Chag, if you didn't make a Shechianu on the arrival of Yom Tov, you forgot to make the Shechianu, you can make the Shechianu as long as it's still Sukkos. You can still thank Hashem for allowing you to live to see Sukkos. You can do that as long as it's Sukkos. Va'afilu b'loy kais, and you don't need to do it on a kais. You can do it without a kais. The Zman Yachal Loimer Isaiah Afilu b'shuk. The Gemara says you can do that in the street whenever you want. You don't need a kais, and you don't have to be in the sukkah. But that's why this Mishnah Berurah is referring to the bracha of Shechianu on the Chag, not the bracha of Shechianu on the sukkah. Finally, Ois Cotton Gimel. So the Mechaber said the reason Shechianu is last is because it goes back on the Chag and on the sukkah. So it has to come after Kiddush and after the Leishev. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Mikamakim, nevertheless, Bidi Eved, Im Avar Berach Zman Vachikach Sukkah, if you messed up the order of the brachas, and you did Yayin, Kiddush, Shechianu, and then Leishev, Einay Chayzer Levarich Zman, you don't have to make another Shechianu. In other words, don't think that if you made the Shechianu before the Leishev, now you have to make another Shechianu after the Leishev to go back on the mitzvah of Sukkah. No. Varminan, instead we say, the high Zman, that this bracha of Shechianu that you made, Koi Gama Sukkah de Basrei, it covers even the mitzvah of Sukkah that you're going to mention afterwards in the Leishev. Now, I'm not going to read it inside because we're already late, but on Kuf Tes Amud Beis and Sharet Zion, Ois Cotton Gimel, the Mishnah Berurah gives a little bit the reason for this halacha. Again, just so that we understand what we're talking about here. The Mishnah Berurah, the Mechaber made a very compelling argument. He said that the Shechianu has to come last because it goes back both on Kiddush and on the mitzvah of Sukkah. So it has to come after Kiddush and after the Leishev. Now, says the Chavetz Chaim, what if you goofed and you did Yayin, Kiddush, Shechianu, and then Leishev? So now maybe the Shechianu didn't go on the mitzvah of Sukkah because you made the bracha on the mitzvah of Sukkah after the Shechianu. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no, don't worry about it. The Shechianu still covers even the mitzvah of Sukkah. Says the Chavetz Chaim in the Sharet Zion, a nice cut in Gimel. He says the funny thing over here is that this is not the logic. The Mechaber's logic for why the Shechianu comes last is not the logic that's given by the Gemara in Sukkah. The Gemara in Sukkah on Nun Vav Amud Aleph gives a different logic. This is really a halacha, it's a memor of Rav. Rav says that the bracha of Leishev Basukkah comes first, and then only comes the Shechiyanu. Why? Rav says. Rav doesn't give this argument that we have to mention Kiddush and Sukkah before the Shechiyanu so that the Shechiyanu could go back on both. Rav says something else. Rav says we have a bracha of Leishev Basukkah. The mitzvah of Sukkah is the Chayvas Hayom. That's the mitzvah of today. We would just Mekadesh Sukkos, and now we have a Chiyuv to eat in the Sukkah. So that's the bracha of Leishev Basukkah. Then we have over here a bracha of Shechiyanu, where we have to thank the Rabbanan Shalom for allowing us to reach Sukkos, for allowing us to be Mekayim the mitzvah of Sukkah, of building a Sukkah. Okay, so we have a question. Maybe the Shechiyanu should come first. Why should the Shechiyanu come first? I'll tell you why the Shechiyanu should come first. Tadir v'she'ein tadir, tadir kaidem. Which bracha do you make more frequently? Leishev Basukkah or Shechiyanu? Probably the Shechiyanu. So the argument of tadir v'she'ein tadir would put the Shechiyanu first. So here we have in the Gemara Nun Vav Amud Aleph, we have a machlokes Rav and Rabba Bar Chana. Rav says Leishev first. Why? Chayvas Hayom. Because it's Sukkos. This is the Chiyuv of Sukkos. We would just Mekadesh Sukkos, and therefore the bracha that has to come first is the bracha that goes on the Chayvas Hayom. The Leishev has to come first. Rabba Bar Chana, he says no, golden rule, Tadir v'she'ein tadir, tadir kaidem. The Shechiyanu comes first. We paskin like Rav. And since we paskin like Rav, the Chayvas Hayom has to come first. Nothing to do with that the Shechiyanu has to come last because it goes back on Kiddush Hayom and on Sukkah. No, the reason why the Leishev has to come before the Shechiyanu is because we paskin like Rav, that we have to mention Chayvas Hayom, and that takes precedence over Tadir v'she'ein tadir, tadir kaidem. Now, if that's the reason why the Leishev has to come first, that's not li'ikuva. So it doesn't matter. If you goofed and you did it the other way, you don't lose the bracha. It's just a question of kedima. It's a question of precedence. So therefore, says the Chavetz Chaim in the Sharet Tzion, yeah, b'diavad, if you mess the order up, it's okay. What do you mean? The Mechaber gave us a very compelling reason. Maybe if you make the Shechiyanu before the Leishev, maybe now the Shechiyanu doesn't go back on the mitzvah of Sukkah. Says the Chavetz Chaim, no. The Mechaber's argument aside, if you look in the Gemara, you see what the Gemara's reason is, why the order of the brachas is that way. So you see very clearly that it's not li'ikuva. If it's not li'ikuva, so b'diavad, it's okay. Wow, this took a lot longer than I expected. Let's go on to Sif Beis. Top line in the Shulchan Aruch Kuf Yud Amud Aleph. Le HaRambam, according to the Shita of the Rambam. We have a famous machlokes, the Rambam and the Rosh. According to the Rambam, well, let's read right away here the first words of the Mechaber Sif Beis. La Rambam, according to the Rambam, Mekadesh Mu'umad, you should make Kiddush in the Sukkah while you're standing. Umevarach Leishev Basukkah, then make the bracha of Leishev Basukkah v'yoshev, and then sit down. Now this is V'achakach Mevarach Zvan, and then like we said, and then last but not least, you'll make the bracha of Shechiyanu all the way at the end. But the point that the Mechaber is making over here in the beginning of Sif Beis is that according to the Rambam, you should make Kiddush while you're standing, and you should only sit after you make the bracha of Leishev Basukkah. And the reason the Rambam learns that way is because the Rambam holds that the beginning of the mitzvah of Yeshiva Sukkah is literally when you sit in the Sukkah. As long as you're standing in the Sukkah and you're making Kiddush, you didn't really yet start to be Mekayim the mitzvah of Yeshiva Sukkah. The beginning of being Mekayim the mitzvah of Yeshiva Sukkah is literally when you sit down in the Sukkah. Well, the rule is that all brachas are supposed to be made over L'asiyasam. You have to make a bracha before you Mekayim the mitzvah. So therefore the Rambam says, make Kiddush while you're standing, because you did not yet make a bracha on Yeshiva Sukkah. So you have no right to sit down. So make Kiddush while you're standing. then make the bracha of leishev basukkah. As soon as you make the bracha of leishev basukkah, sit down, right? And then make the bracha of shechiyanu. Don't make the bracha of shechiyanu first and then sit down, because then you're creating a hefsek between the bracha of leishev basukkah and the mitzvah of sitting down. So no, make the bracha of leishev basukkah. That's the berachos ha-mitzvahs that you're making on the mitzvah of residing in the sukkah, which begins when you sit down. And immediately after you make the bracha, sit down, and then make the shechiyanu. So again, says the Mechaber in Sif Beis, Rambam, according to the Rambam, that the mitzvah of yeshivas ha-sukkah begins with sitting down in the sukkah, mekadesh mu'umid. You should make Kiddush while you're standing. Umevarach leishev ha-sukkah. Then after Kiddush, make the bracha of leishev, v'yoshev, and then sit down. V'achar kach mevarach zman. And then make the bracha of shechiyanu. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ice Cotton Dalit, second line in the Mishnah Berurah, Mekadesh Mu'umid, you should make Kiddush while you're standing. Why? Because according to the opinion of the Rambam, HaYeshiva, the sitting down in the sukkah, Hu Tchilas Asiyas HaMitzvah. That's the beginning of being Mekayim the mitzvah of Yeshiva Sukkah. V'yesh lo levarach over l'asiyasam. And you have to make the bracha before you begin to be Mekayim the mitzvah. Haynu kaidem asiyas Tchilas HaMitzvah. Which means before you begin being Mekayim the mitzvah. V'yesh lo linoy kain kol shivas hayamim. And according to the Rambam, this is the way you should comport yourself all 7 days of Sukkos. Every time you come to the sukkah, make a bracha of leishev basukkah, and then sit down. That's according to the Rambam. V'harash, but the Rosh disagrees with this Rambam. V'harash svirale, the Rosh holds that you don't make the bracha before you begin to be Mekayim the mitzvah, which means before you begin to sit down. For Rosh Svirale, the Rosh holds, sheyesh lismay chabracha al ikar mitzvah shehi ha'achila, that it's more appropriate to bring the bracha as close as possible to the main part, to the primary act of being Mekayim the mitzvah. The primary act of being Mekayim the mitzvah of Yeshiva Sukkah is not sitting on a chair. The primary act of being Mekayim the mitzvah is eating a sudas kva in the sukkah. So the Rosh says, don't make the bracha before you sit down. Make the bracha before you actually start to eat. In Tafresh Lamites, we saw that the primary act of the mitzvah of Yeshivas HaSukkah is eating in the sukkah. And that's why we kivei the bracha on the eating. So the Rosh says, no, don't make the bracha standing and then sit down and then make a shechiyanu. No, make the whole Kiddush while you're sitting. Make the leishev basukkah as close as possible with as few interpositions as possible to the actual act of eating or drinking. So now, if we go back up to the Siv Beis, see what the Ramah says. Ve'enai hagim came. We're not noig like the Rambam to make Kiddush standing, then make the leishev and then sit down. Ella rather mekachin miyushav. We make Kiddush while we're sitting. V'chein das harosh. That's the opinion of the Rosh. Now let's see, Mishnah Berurah is cutting hay. Leishev basukkah, according to the Rambam, you make the bracha of leishev, v'yoshev, and then you sit down, v'achar kach mevarach zman, and then you make the shechiyanu. Says the Chavetz Chaim, bal afuke, the mechaber over here, when he says that you make the leishev, and then you sit, and then you make the shechiyanu, bal afuke, he's coming to contrast, he's coming to dispute, shelo yavarach birkas zman kodim sheyeshev. Don't make the leishev, then the shechiyanu, and then sit down. No, don't interpose the bracha of shechiyanu between the bracha of leishev and the act of sitting down. Make the leishev, sit down, then make the shechiyanu. Even though as far as the shechiyanu is concerned, there would be nothing wrong with making the shechiyanu while you're standing. Nevertheless, it would be inappropriate to do this for a different reason. Because you have to bring the kiyam ha-mitzvah as close as possible to the recitation of the bracha. And therefore, once you make the bracha of a leishev, tzarech leishev tekef. You have to sit down immediately. So don't make the leishev and then wait to sit down until you make the shechiyanu. Make the leishev and then sit down. Mishnah Berurah Siv Cotton Ches. No, whoops, I skipped a line. That's why I'm getting confused. Ule'inyan. And ule'inyan im yechaylim kam. This is now a peripheral halacha. Ule'inyan im yechaylim kama balibatim l'kadish besukkah bebasachas. Let's say you're eating with a bunch of people. You have 30 people sitting at the table. And maybe you have multiple couples. And maybe you want to make Kiddush to be mitzi, your wife and your kids. And to somebody else, another family member, another married family member, he wants to make Kiddush and he wants to be mitzi, his wife and his kids. And there's a third one who wants to be mitzi, his wife and his kids. Do you have to wait and take turns and make the Suda take another 20 minutes longer? Or could you all make Kiddush at the same time and you'll all be mitzi, whoever you want to be mitzi? Is that okay? The reason it would possibly not be okay is because the argument could be made that we say trei kali loy mishtami, that two voices cannot be heard clearly at the same time. And if that would be true, then how could I be mitzi my wife and kids while my brother-in-law is being mitzi his wife and his kids? Our wives and our kids will not be able to hear us clearly to be yotze with the bracha because they can't distinguish the voice that they need to hear from between the various voices that are all being spoken. So the Mishnah Berurah says as follows. Over there the Mishnah Berurah is talking about Hallel. And the Mishnah Berurah says if 5 people are saying Hallel at the same time, and they're each being mitzi different people in the recitation of Hallel, is that okay? And the Mishnah Berurah says yes. Why? Because Hallel is chaviv. Hallel is very beloved. And since it's beloved, the people who are listening are concentrating, and they're going to hear every word, and it's okay. Continues the Mishnah Berurah. V'roi loymar bracha d'sukkah b'koil. It would be proper to recite the bracha of leishev b'sukkah out loud. B'mishicha. Slowly. Not, wait a minute. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddishanu b'mitzvaysav v'tzivanu leishev b'sukkah. It should be made aloud, b'mishicha, slowly, b'nigun, with a tune, kishar brachas to Kiddush. Just like the rest of Kiddush. The whole Kiddush has a nigun. Asher baruch abanu mikol ha'am, v'rayim amanu mikol ha'shayin. So the leishev also. Asher kiddishanu b'mitzvaysav v'tzivanu leishev b'sukkah. Whatever nigun you want to use. Leishev b'sukkah. V'hu adin b'chol shar brachas, and Mishnah Berurah says the truth is this applies to all brachas. Yarga loymar b'kol ram, you should make a habit of making brachas out loud, ki ha'kol ma'ir ha'kavana, because saying things out loud, that brings out the kavana, that makes you pay attention to what it is that you're saying. So, to wrap up Siv Beis over here, so the Mechaber brought down the Rambam, that according to the Rambam, really you should make Kiddush standing and then only sit down after the leishev, because according to the Rambam, the Tchilas Asiyas HaMitzvah is when you sit down, and you should make the bracha, and then right away start being Mekayim the mitzvah, sit down. According to the Rush, maybe it's true that sitting down in the sukkah is a mitzvah, but that's not the primary act of the mitzvah. The primary act of the mitzvah is the actual eating or drinking. Therefore, we're not like the Rush, where we sit down before we make the leishev, because we don't want to make a leishev while we're standing and then sit down. No, we're already sitting. We want to bring the leishev as close to the actual act of drinking at the end of Kiddush. So we make the leishev, then we have to make the zman. We can't forget about making the shechiyanu. We make the shechiyanu, and then right away we drink. I thought we would get a little bit weiter. I thought we would start Siv Gimel, not to be. So okay, tomorrow we'll begin with Siv Gimel. A good HaMoed, everyone. I'm recording this on the first night of Chol HaMoed. A good HaMoed. I hope everybody's having a wonderful Yom Tov. Thank you for taking out time. We learned in Hilchas Chol HaMoed, I think I have the Lashon right here. We learned in Hilchas Chol HaMoed, why did the Rabbeinu Shalom give us Chol HaMoed? Oh, I thought it was right here. Yeah. Tav Beis Amid Aleph in Chelik Vav. Shekavonas Hashem Yisparach b'nesinas HaMoed. Why do Rebbeinu Shalom give us the Moyadim? Kedei lehidavek b'yirasai v'ahavasai, so that we should attach ourselves to Yiras Hashem and to love of Hashem. Ve'lasaik b'tayrasai atamima, and to take time to be Isaac b'Torah. Ad kan l'shaynai. So I hope we take advantage of it, and we take out time to be Isaac b'Torah Hashem. Be well, everyone.